Hello, welcome to my YouTube channel. Thank you for tuning in. This will be the third video in my hockey analytics project. And if you haven't watched the first two, I do recommend doing that first. I think it's best to watch these videos in chronological order. I'll leave a link in the description so you can watch those if you want to. Okay, so in the previous two videos, we talked about getting data from the NHL API based on a single date selection. Now, this is a perfect way to get data for daily updates or for live data, because you just put in like last night's date and then it will go get the data, or you can use it for live updates as well. Now, if we want to get data for, say, the previous 10 seasons, then it's not really a good way to do it. So in this video, we want to create a tool that gets data for a full season at a time. So that's like the main purpose of this video. So I've loaded Excel. It's just an empty Excel. I just put in the NHL API endpoints that we're going to use. So most of these we used in the previous videos as well. The schedule is a little bit different, but we'll just get back to that. Other than that, it's just an empty workbook. Okay, so before we get started, I want to talk just very briefly about privacy settings. Because this one needs to be, we need to ignore privacy settings for all of this to work. So let's just go to query options here. And you can do that either globally or based solely on this specific workbook. But you do need to go to privacy and say always ignore privacy settings here, or go to the current workbook and say ignore privacy settings. You can't tick it here because I set it to always globally, so you can't change it in. So you have to change it here and then change it down here. But this needs to be ticked for it to work. Otherwise, you can't create the functions and call multiple API and make multiple API calls at the same time. So if you're not watching these videos and just trying to use the tools, it won't work unless you ignore the privacy settings. Okay, so let's just get started. So in the previous video, we selected a single day and then we called the API and got the data based on that date selection. In this video, we're going to select a season and then get the data based on that selection. So we'll just create a new sheet and we can call it select season. And we'll just create a table, call it select season, and we could just put in 2023, 2024. So this past season will just be our example season. So let's just make this into a table, and we're going to use this selection in all of our data modeling, all of our API calling. So we're going to need to put this into the data model. So we'll just say add this get data from table range. So now we are adding it to our Power Query. So it's just a simple table with the season selection. So we could even call this one season. Yeah, let's just call it season. Oh, that was not. So I just wanted to. We don't want to load this. So let's just change it and say only create connection. And then just delete this one. It was a mistake. But now we have it loaded into our Power Query, and there's a connection created. So I'll just do the same for our URL table here. That's why I went back to Excel. I want to put this table in Power Query as well, so that I don't have to go back and forth between Excel and Power Query. So let's just do the same. Say add this to Power Query. It's called table 1. Let's call it URLs. Okay, so we're not going to use this table for anything other than just getting the API endpoints. Okay, so that was the first step. So far, so good. Now we want to start off by getting the skaters and the goaltenders and put those into one table. And it has to be, you can see here is the API call that we're going to need. So it includes the season, and you can see that there is a skater part as well. We need to add the goaltender part and the goalie part as well. But we need to make it dynamic, so we want to take the input from our season selection and make the API call based on that. So let's just try. Let's just start off by copying this URL and then go to our season table and then just add a column where we put in the URL. So let's call this skaters. Then just paste the URL, and then instead of putting in the fixed season, we'll just put in the season selection. So now it's dynamic, so that when we change the season selection, it will also change the URL. And you can see there's a mistake here. That's because, let's just click on it. That's because we're combining the operator and with both text and numbers, and that won't work. It has to be all texts. So we just need to change the format here, make it into a text, replace current, and you can see now it works because now we're combining texts. And it looks correct. So whenever we are changing the season selections out in Excel, this URL should update as well. So we can use this one to get skater information, but we also want to have goaltender information. So I'll actually just add yet another column, and we can call this goalies. And we'll change the season, but then we'll also change skater to goalie. So now it calls all the goaltenders from the selected season. Okay, so now we have the URLs that we need. So we just need to call them. And we could do that in a few different ways, but I actually think it's easier to create a function just like we did in the previous videos and then put it all in this table here. So actually we'll rename this table to players. So what we want to do, so in order to do that, we have to put these two columns into one column and then create a function and then invoke that function on this new column. We'll get used to it because we're going to do it a few times in this video. So we'll just start off by selecting both columns. Now we can do the onPivot selected column. So what this does, it puts it into one column, and then you have the attribute, which is skaters and goalies. So it's the name of the columns before we did the onPivot. Hope this makes sense. So now we have the two endpoints that we are going to call in one column. So in order to do that, we need to create a function and invoke that function on this column right here. We'll just call it link players. Okay, so in order to create the function, we need to create a temporary table. We did this multiple times in the previous video, so you should be getting the hang of it by now. So we'll just get data from the web, put in the URL, and create the temporary table. And you can see here that there's 1156 players, skaters, I should say, and we're just interested in the data. We'll convert that into a table, and this is what we need our function to do. Just get the data and convert it into a table. So in order to create a function, we need to make a parameter. So we'll call this one link players, and it has to be a text, and we'll just put in the URL as our current value. So now we have a parameter, and then we need to change the source so it's not a fixed URL, but it's actually the parameter. Link players, and then when we hit enter, nothing should happen because the current value is the same as what the URL was before. So now we have a table here with a parameter as the source, so we can create a function based on that. Let's call it function players, hit OK. And what this function does is it just goes through these steps from our temporary table. So we don't need the table anymore. Let's just delete that one. And then we have the function that we can call. So we'll just need to go to the players table, select the column that we want to invoke our function on, go to add column, invoke custom function, and select the function. The column should be correct. And it works. So now it calls all the skaters and then it calls all the goaltenders. So let's just expand this. And let's expand this. And let's hit load more. And we're going to just use the same columns as we did in the previous videos. So we're interested in birth date, we're interested in draft position, draft year, height, player ID, nationality code, position code, shoots, catches, skater name, and weight. So it should be noted here that there is no goalie full name, and I know that there should be a column called goalie full name. So that is a problem, and that's because we're only scanning the first 1000 rows, and there was 1156 skaters or something like that. So we can't see the column called goalie full name, but I know it's in there. But let's just try and expand it for now. So we need to fix this in the code here. So we need to just add goalie full name. And then just copy this one and add it down here as well. And I think that should work. So now we have a column called goalie full name. And when we load more, there should be all the goaltenders here. Yeah, so it works. But it's just something you have to be aware of, that if you're calling two different URLs and the columns aren't the same, there might be some columns missing, so you have to know what columns to add to it. Anyway, we got everything we need here now. Obviously, we don't want to have a column called skater full name and a column called goalie full name. We just want a column called name. And also the position code, we have some null values, but we have no goaltenders. So we need to change the null to a G for goaltender. Okay. So we need to add just a few new columns here. We do have this attribute column that says if it's a skater or if it's a goaltender. So we can actually use that. So let's just go add a conditional column. And let's start off by getting the position. So we'll just say attribute. If that one is equal to skaters, then we'll choose the column position code. If that's not the case, then we'll just put in a G for goaltenders. So now we have a position where we included goaltenders. Okay. Now we need to add another column with the name. We'll just use the same approach. Attribute, if this one equals skaters, then we want the column skater full name. If that's not the case, then we want the column goalie full name. So now we have a column called name. We just need to remove the extra columns that we don't really want. Attribute and links, let's just delete those as well. So let's go here, go choose columns, attribute, link, position code, skater, and goalie. Let's remove these. And this is what our players table will look like. And this data will change based on the season selection out in Excel. Yeah, so actually we can change the name here to season. I think that makes more sense. The last thing we do is we're not just gonna select all of this and go detect data type. So it just automatically fills in the data type. Okay, so now we have the players that we need. So the next thing I want to look up is just all teams. We don't need to create a function or anything for that. We'll just call this URL. So let's just go new source from web, put in the URL and load it. So there are a total of 61 teams. And we'll just make it into a table and then we'll just expand it. So let's just expand it all for now. Okay, so there are 61 teams here, but that's not quite right because there's also a row for NHL, which is not a team. And there's even a to be determined row down here. I don't know why they've added those, but they are. So there are 59 actual teams having played in the NHL ever since 1917. So we want this tool to work dating back not just in modern era, but all the way back to 1917. So we want to have all teams in the data set. Yeah, so about this data, well, there's a raw try-code and a try-code. And I have no idea why there's two columns here because they are exactly the same. So we'll just delete one of them, and the league ID makes no sense because it's just the same all the way down. So we'll just delete delete that one as well. But let's just rename this to team ID and this one to team. And then delete this one and delete this one. Okay, so this is our teams table. Let's just select everything and detect data type. Okay, so far so good. So now we have our players table, we have our team table, we can call it teams just to be consistent. So now what we want to do is we want to get the schedule based on the season selection. And we have this URL here. Just one thing. So we just want to use all the teams here and put that in here, and then put in the selected season as well. Now what will happen if we put in a team that doesn't play in the 23-24 season? Well, it will show up as an empty table. So it's not gonna make a mistake. This is quite important, but it will just be an empty table. So this means that we can just use our teams table here as the basis for our schedule calls. So we'll just duplicate this table. So now we have a table called teams, but now we'll use this as the basis for our schedules. I hope this makes sense. So what we need is this team, and then we need the selected season. So how are we going to get the selected season? Well, we can go to the players table and go actually all the way up to the beginning. And then instead of doing all of these, we'll just select this one and add as a new query. So now we have a value here. We have a text value that gives us the selected season. Okay, so this means that we can now create a column with the correct URLs. So we're just going to copy this, go to schedule, go to add column, and we'll call this one link schedule. And we're going to just paste it here. And then instead of having the team, we'll put in the team here. And then we need this right here. And then instead of putting in the season, we can write select season, and it will pick up this value here. So let's see if it works, and it does. So this gives us the schedule URLs that we need to call in order to get the schedule for the fall season. Now there's obviously a lot of teams here that doesn't play in the 23-24 season, but that's not a problem because it will just end up being an empty table. So let's make this into a text, and then we need to create a function, invoke that function on this column, just like we did before. So we'll have to start off by creating a temporary table. And you can see here, if we hit games list, this one should be empty. And it is. But we still need to make it into a table. And it's just an empty table. Perfect. So this is what we want our function to do. So now we just need to change the source to a parameter. So we need to add a new parameter. Say link schedule text and paste in the current value. Go back to the table, change the source. Link schedule and hit enter. And then we need to use this table to create our function. Let's call this function schedule. Hit OK, and then let's just delete our temporary table. And then we need to invoke our function on this column. Function schedule. And then now we can expand it. Let's just select the same columns as we did in the previous videos. So let's choose game ID, season, game type, game date, venue, no, start time, yes, game state, whether it's a future game or whether it has been played. Let's keep that one in there. Away team, home team, game outcome. So this is what we're gonna keep from the schedule call. Okay, so first of all, you can see there's a lot of null values because all of these teams didn't play in the NHL that season. So we'll just remove those. Actually, let's just remove those right now. So let's just say filter. So now we've only included teams that actually played that season. Okay, so far so good. We need to expand the home team and the away team. And we did this last time. We want the abbreviation and we want the score. And we want to do the same for the away team. And then we need to rename these because they make no sense. So we'll just say away team, away score, home team, home score, and then we'll expand this one as well. So it tells us if the game was won in regulation, in overtime, or in shootout. Actually, one more thing we need to do here is the game type. Right now it says 1, 2, 3. 1 is preseason games, 2 is regular season games, and 3 is playoffs games. But let's just remove all preseason games from the data. You might want to include those, but I don't want that here. Yeah, and then the ID, let's call it game ID instead. So now we have our schedule table with game ID, season, game type, everything looks correct. So the first few columns here we actually don't want. So this team right here is just the team we used to make our call. So that column makes no sense to keep. So let's just remove the first columns here. Now, if we sort this by game ID. Then we see that there's actually 2 game IDs for every single game. That's because we're calling for each team. So we call the schedule both for the home team and call the schedule for the away team, if that makes sense. So we have a lot of duplicate values for every single game ID. Thankfully, that's easy to fix. So we'll just say remove duplicates. So now we have the full schedule of the 23-24 season. So we'll just select it all and go detect data type. And I think this looks correct. So now we have our players table, our teams table, our schedule table. So let's go to URLs here and say, so now we want to call the play-by-play and we want to call the shift data. And we can see here that we're gonna need the game ID and we're gonna need the game ID. So in order for it to be dynamic, we'll just take it from the schedule here. So this schedule table changes whenever we make a new season selection. So we can just add this column as a new query. And we need to make it into a table and we'll call it game ID. And we'll actually make it into a text because we're going to use it to create our URL. And then we'll use this as the basis for our play-by-play data. And we'll actually just duplicate this one because we're going to use the game ID also in order to get the shift data. So we'll just do it like this. And let's go back to the play-by-play table. So now we need to copy this one and just add a column here with the URL in order to call the play-by-play data. So let's just go add column. Let's call it link play-by-play. Put in the URL and change the game ID to our game ID column. And then hit enter. So now we have the URLs that we need. And we just need to create a function one more time. So in order to do that, we'll copy this and create a temp table, new source from web, enter the URL. And there's a lot of information here, but what we're interested in is just the plays. So we'll just click on this list, convert it into a table, and this is what our function needs to do. So from here, we'll just add a parameter, call it link play-by-play, make it a text and put in our current value. And then we just need to change the source from the fixed URL to our parameter, link play-by-play, hit enter. And now we can create a function based on this table. Let's call it function play-by-play. And then we can just delete our temporary table, say delete. And go back to the play-by-play table. And then we need to invoke the function on this column. So just go invoke custom function. This might take just a little while because We are now calling the API quite a lot of times. So there's, I think there's 1400 games in this season. Anyway, we'll just open it. Didn't take that long, by the way. We'll just expand it, and then we'll expand it one more time. And some of these things we don't want. Time remaining, let's just delete that one. Yeah, I think we're going to keep the rest. The period descriptor, let's expand this one. The only thing we're interested in is the period number. Just let's rename this to period. And it looks correct. Then we need to expand the details. And here it's quite important to hit load more, otherwise you won't get all the data. And this is all of our play-by-play data. So let's just expand it all. And in the previous videos, we didn't do any cleaning on this, and we're not going to do that in this video either. We'll do that in future videos. So we'll just keep everything as it is right now. This is our play-by-play data for the fall season. So let's just select it all and hit the detect data type. And then, as always with these timing periods, we need to change it back into a text instead of having it a time. And then we'll clean it up in MySQL later on. Other than that, it's okay. This is our play-by-play data. And then the final thing we need to do is we need to do the exact same thing for our shift data. So here, let's just go copy the URL. Copy, go to shift, add a new column, call it link shift, put in the URL and change the game ID to our game ID column. That's it. Then we need to create a function. So we just need one game and create our temp table. And there's 751 shift in this particular game, so we're just interested in the list and converting it into a table. So now we have all the steps that we need. So we need to create a new parameter, link shift. It should be a text, and this should be our current value. And then we just need to change the source to our parameter. Link shift, hit enter, and it works. So now we can create a function based on this table. Let's call it function shift. And now we're just going to delete this table because we don't need it anymore. What we do need to do is we need to invoke the function on this column here. So let's go add column, invoke custom function, function shift. And yes, so now we just need to expand it. And we need to expand it one more time. And again, there's a lot of values here that we don't, and a lot of columns here that we don't need. The game ID, we already have that. End time is important. Game IDs, we already have that one. The ID here is the shift ID, not important. I don't really know how to use that anyway. Hex value, no. Period, yes. Player ID, yes. Shift number, which is the shift number of the particular player in that particular game. Start time, we need that. Team ID, we need that. And that's it. So let's just expand these and take a look. It looks correct. You could of course add in the player name, but we have that information in the players table, so we'll just combine those later on. I think that's smarter, especially because this table here is quite large. So there's no need to add unnecessary columns to it. So we'll just select everything and go detect data type, and then we need to change the times into text. Yes, we could just remove this table as well. Again, this table here, when we load it, will be around 1 million rows for the full season. So there's no need to have unnecessary columns in it. Okay, so actually I think that's it. So now we have our players table, we have our teams table, we have our schedule table, we have our play-by-play data, we have our shift data, and it's all connected to the season selection. So whenever we change the season and hit refresh, then it will load the data for that specific season. So let's just try and say close and load. And let's just add it to the data model right away. So this is gonna take just a little while because as I said, the data we're fetching now is quite large sample size. So let's just hit enter, and then you don't have to look at it work, but I'll just skip this part. But it should take around 10 minutes, I think. Okay, so we're back. This took about 10 minutes to load. And if we're going down here, we can see that the shift table is quite large. It's actually a little bit more than 1 million rows. So we wouldn't even be able to load it into a table in Excel because it's above the maximum number of rows. The play-by-play data is 445,000. And other than that, we've loaded everything. You can see there's 1400 games in this particular season. So we haven't loaded the data into tables because the tables will be very large. So we've just loaded it to our data model, and then we'll go fetch it from the data model later on. You could create pivot tables from the data model if you wanted to, but for now we'll just leave it in the data model. Now, the one interesting thing I want to do here as the last part of this video is to just test it with another season, and let's just go all the way back. So let's say 1919 to 1920 and see what happens. So let's try and load this. This should be a lot faster because there are a lot fewer games and there's no shift data here. So let's just try and refresh and see what happens. All right, so we've loaded the 1920 season, 1920 season, I should say. And we can see here that there is 53 games that season. And yeah, some of these teams I don't know who they are, but it doesn't really matter. It works. You get the schedule even if you're selecting a season all the way back there. Now all the shift data, this table should be just empty because there is no shift data dating that far back. The play-by-play data works, but only penalties and goals are included. But this is just to illustrate that you can actually use this tool to get game report data for all games having been played since the 1917-1918 season. I think that's the first one in the NHL. So I do hope you enjoyed this video. This was to show how you can fetch data from the NHL API for a full season at a time. Then we're going to use this and clean this data in later videos. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And that will be all for this video. Thank you all.